Okay, it's all in your hands.
All right. Perfect, guys. Well, thanks so much for having me again, Malcolm. I'm stoked to be back here. And tonight we kind of last night we did a deep dive into kind of philosophy and like why, basically what we call the, um, what's the word we use? Well, it's like why we need to act, essentially. I have a nicer word for that, but, and I know that there's probably a lot of people on this call, because people that are in the light seller community are pretty aware of what's going on in the world, I would say. I think the piece that I like to kind of bring everybody back up to is that in order to be able to fix this, you and I were talking just before we went live tonight. We actually have to fix our mentality first. The technical components are actually pretty easy. Which sounds a little bit trite, given the complexity and the scale of the issues that we have on the planet. So we talked last time about the industrial system and how it's linear. I'm just going to bring a couple slides up. We're going to go back a couple slides just to kind of bring you back up to pace with where we were last class. And then we're going to get right back into it. And tonight, I've actually got a design exercise for everybody that you guys can do. And you may choose to do it this evening, but you can also choose to do it another evening, or tonight after the class, or tomorrow. And then you can bring these back to the class and we can talk about it next time. I'm going to give you a couple of exercises tonight. I'm going to give you an exercise tonight that completely transformed my engineering career. And I attribute a big part of the success that I've seen over the years and the enjoyment as well in my career to this one design tool that I'm going to share with you next. It is my favorite thing of all time. It occupies 90% of my time when I'm thinking about design. I think about when I'm going to sleep. I think about it when I wake up in the morning. In fact, I thought about it when Malcolm reached out to me to teach this. I was thinking about this thing. So just a little teaser there to keep you guys enticed and get you juiced up for what we're going to talk about. Let's go back a couple slides and then we're going to get into the meat. So the industrial system we talked about was linear. And so we've got the source of energy, which is essentially hydrocarbons. That gets put into some form of industrial something. In this case, agriculture. Then it goes to the consumer and we wrap it in more petroleum. And are you guys hearing that background noise on my end? Okay, yep. Good. All right, I can turn the gain down if needed. Just let me know because there's some stuff happening downstairs. Then it goes to the consumer and then it goes to landfill. So very linear. These systems are really, really efficient, but they're not very effective. And so they're efficient because we can put enormous amounts of throughput through, but most of the things that we put through it, we only use once. And so we end up with these massive landfills. And so waste is not in nature, but it is in human nature, at least right now. And so in the ecological system, they're based in networks and nets. And in fact, a really neat analogy to networks is the fact that if you're a fisherman and you're out fishing, just give me a sec here. Sorry about that. Family stuff going in the background there. All right, so a network, an ecology is a network. And so if we think about an analogy to that, a fishing net can lose 80% of its links and still catch fish. So networks are inherently resilient, they're inherently strong. And coming back to that comment we were talking about earlier about the gentleman that's staying with us right now, who's learning from us, we were showing him some videos about how to repair ecosystems and talking a little bit about what's involved in that. And his comment was like, wow, it's that easy? Like you just have to do this, this, and this, like 3 or 4 things. I'm like, yeah, totally. And so what he was observing there, or what I've observed over my career, is that when you fix a couple key elements, nature comes back. All we have to do is get out of her way. We just have to give her a little bit of space. And then as we improve our humility, ultimately, show up at the right times and support her. And she does all the rest. It's absolutely unbelievable. Nature is just waiting to connect. It's kind of like the explosion that we've seen with the internet. So as soon as the internet showed up, like within 10 years now, like these things are ubiquitous. Everybody has one. They've completely transformed the way that we communicate, the way that we do business. Email, like same thing. The next kind of major thing that we're looking at right now as a species is cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency is actually perfectly represented by this network-based diagram. Whether or not you believe in it or think it's a good idea, I guess that's to be determined by humanity going forward. But it fundamentally operates on some of these principles. There's some places where it falls apart. I'm not by any means saying that I'm sold on cryptocurrency. I don't know enough about it to be able to say that, but it does operate in a decentralized network-based system. So we can take this understanding of nature and we can apply it to some basic understandings. And once we have these basic understandings, we can then apply it to the way that we live our lives. And so this slide is probably the most important slide I've ever made. And every time I look at it, I learn something new from this slide. Even though I made it, I have additional insights. And so come back to this slide later and see if you have any additional insights. So in this slide, we're juxtaposing two types of ecosystems. And remember, permaculture is all about pattern. If you're noticing my hands are dirty, I was just outside running my tractor, so I'm a bit filthy right now. So immature ecosystems are on the left-hand side, and mature ecosystems on the right-hand side. And so you can add, you can think about this in different ways. An immature ecosystem is one that is not always, but generally fairly degraded. So it's not very productive. Generally we would say that if you're getting a lot of weeds on your landscape, or whether it's in a rural kind of agricultural sense, or even if it's on your home yard, then we'd say it's immature. An immature ecosystem would be classified as the front lawn. An immature ecosystem would be, we would classify a gravel road as an immature ecosystem. It'd be the same, an asphalt road would be an immature ecosystem. And so basically we can kind of think about ecosystems that are immature as not very diverse, not very stable, full of things we don't generally want. Whereas a mature ecosystem, probably the best thing or vision or visualization I can give to you is the redwood forest in California. Or even the old growth forest near Tofino, or certain parts of British Columbia where forest has not been clear cut, or even native prairie that has been untouched or unplowed would be considered a mature ecosystem. So there's not many of these around anymore. In fact, like one of the products that you guys sell, Malcolm, the Brazil nut, requires a mature ecosystem in order to thrive. A colleague of yours and mine, Rob Sinclair, is actually working for, I think you're drinking mate right now, is that right? Yeah, okay. So I think Guayaki, or I can never pronounce it properly, but
yeah, Guayaki.
Guayaki. Yeah. They're actually a super interesting company that fellow friend of Malcolm's and mine is working for, and they specifically look to produce mate that is grown in regenerative forests, or forests that are ecologically sustainable. And they use a lot of these ideas that we're going to be talking about in this slide. So both of these two ecosystems exist on planet Earth. And so we can say that they both have the same amount of available solar energy. So what I mean by that is that it's the same Earth, and it could be in the same location, like, you know, a meter apart from each other kind of thing. And so they would receive the same amount of sun. Now, I want you to think about sun as the gas, and as the gas pedal, and water as the gasoline. And so depending on the ecosystem you find yourself in, you're going to basically have variable amounts of gasoline and variable amounts of pressure on the gas pedal. And so what we're saying is that in this particular situation, we have the same amount of gas and the same pressure on the gas pedal because these two ecosystems are basically in the same place. So immature ecosystems are going to be based in low diversity. So the front lawn or a wheat field or a canola field. It's crazy how many times our friends will go out and take these pictures out in the prairies in these canola fields because it's such a stark place to take a picture. It's gorgeous with these yellow flowers, but that is one of the most degraded landscapes on the planet. And most people don't realize it because the beauty of the yellow kind of overwhelms them. But you can't ask for pretty much a more degraded ecosystem than that because there's only one plant living in there. And so we love to bemoan weeds. And what are weeds? Weeds are basically nature's attempt at trying to increase diversity in the ecosystem. And usually when we have these low diversity systems, we end up with something called invasive weeds. Invasive weeds are essentially nature's attempt at trying to repair that ecosystem. So weeds are essentially band-aids, and those band-aids show up. And when we get rid of those weeds, it's equivalent to picking the scab on an injury on your arm or wherever on your body over and over and over and over again. So weeds come in to repair the system. And there really is no such thing as invasive or native as far as plants and animals are concerned. And I know that I'm probably opening a can of worms saying that. We probably don't have time to go into a ton of that tonight. I can answer some questions on that a little bit later. But what I will say is that animals and plants have been moving around the planet for thousands and thousands of years. And the plants that we consider to be native here right now are the ones that were here when the first botanist arrived on Turtle Island. And in fact, if you went back 400 years ago, the indigenous people living here would have no word for native or invasive plants. They were just plants, and they were living in a community, and there were observations. And so this is a fundamental difference in reductionist science versus holistic science. And there's some very interesting information coming out in the literature right now that is starting to question the validity of invasive and native plants. Having said that, there are plants that have been here longer than other plants. And so it's worth understanding the difference between the two, because ultimately, if we want plants that are going to thrive in our ecosystem, we want the ones that have the wisdom to do so. So immature systems, low diversity, they're based in annual plants. So annual plants are plants that basically need to be planted every single year. Okay, so tomatoes, kale, corn, squash, wheat would be annual, canola would be annual, oats would be annual. All these plants that only grow for one season versus a perennial plant, which is when you plant it once and then it grows again. Competition. So these systems tend to be riddled with competition. And so you've got essentially, and this is the crazy thing, like if you think about weeds, weeds always respond to a disturbance. And so if you want to know why thistles show up, thistles always show up where the land is being disturbed. Dandelions always show up where there is compacted soil, a deficiency in calcium in the soil, and an abundance of nitrates. And so both canola, wheat, oats, barley, all of these annual plants, the only way we can grow them is by creating disturbance, is by creating the conditions for weeds to thrive. So the same conditions that allow wheat to thrive is the same conditions that will allow the other weeds to thrive. And I've often wondered, this is when it gets a bit esoteric, but if humanity is living on plants that grow in immature ecosystems, how evolved can we actually become? Like, what would it look like if we relied upon mature ecosystems to meet all of our food needs? And I don't think we probably do know the answer. If we look back 400 years to how the indigenous people were living here, there's a doctor who Malcolm's probably familiar with, Dr. Zach Bush. And he says that, that anxiety levels have been rising in society, and he attributes it to the fact that we're all eating meat from confined animal feeding operations, where animals are full of cortisol and adrenaline because of these atrocious environments that they get brought up in. And so like, what are the, and I know I'm getting esoteric here, but like, what are the characteristics of our food when we're constantly assaulting them with chemicals and tillage and essentially like war? If you look at all of the things that we do, what are the repercussions to what happens to our food? So they're based in competition, parasitism, meaning that one parasitizes another because we're in this kind of a dog eat dog world. Nutrient leakage. So every ton of grain that gets produced right now, 7 tons of soil ends up in the ocean. Export. So everything's about production and exportation. There's an old farmer saying that we should never sell anything off our farm that can't walk off our farm. And that's because a plant will take 100% out of the soil. And so they're very much based in this concept of export. Fast change. So any kind of small thing that happens creates rapid change. There's not a lot of resilience in it. And water is exported by drainage. So these systems either have to bring water in order to keep them alive, or if they're in an ecosystem with too much water, they tend to drain the water away versus trying to figure out how to work with what's there. And so the result is a fragile, high resource use, degenerative system. Now, if we move over to the mature ecosystem, it's based in high diversity, so lots of different species, perennial plants. There are always going to be annuals as well. There's nothing wrong with annuals. It's about having that right balance. Cooperation, mutualism, and nutrient circulation. And we can kind of wrap this up, these 3 words, into something that the light cellar is absolutely expert at, which is mycelium. So a tree has the ability to increase its surface area in the soil when it partners with fungi by 800 times. So if you have a plant that's friends with fungi, then that plant will be able to get 800 times more water, 800 times more nutrient, 800 times more nutrition, 800 times more drought resistant. And it just goes on and on and on. And so we talked about a lot of liabilities in that last session that we talked about. Well, peak phosphorus, peak soil, peak nitrogen, peak nutrition. There's a nutrient collapse going on right now. These are all solved by partnering with ecosystems that fundamentally work like forests or like native prairies. And we can go into these systems and learn how they work and then bring them back into the way that we manage our own properties, small or large. And so we have expressions of this that are microscopic all the way up to macroscopic. And perhaps at the end of the session, I'll send some videos to Malcolm that he can send out to his list of ecosystems around the world that are repairing at breakneck speed because people understand these concepts. On-site consumption, slow change, and water export by evaporation. So these are resilient, low resource using, and they're regenerative. And this is where we want to go. So principle number 1 is work is a failure in design. So if traditional agriculture was labor intensive, industrial agriculture is energy intensive, and permaculture design systems are informative and information and design intensive. David Holmgren. So here's where we get into this exercise that has transformed my life. And so needs and yields is an idea that Bill Mollison came up with. And it was a way of trying to understand how to create these systems that are based in mutualism and cooperation. And when you do that, 1 + 1 will equal 3. And I'm going to give you guys an example of that tonight. So chickens, let me just see here. You know what? I'm going to get something here ready for you guys because I'm going to do a little drawing. I didn't get this camera going here before, but chickens basically, and in fact, every element has intrinsic needs and intrinsic yields, which means that we can define, doesn't matter whether we're talking about a chicken or a goat or a greenhouse or a solar panel or a home, every single element has intrinsic needs and it has intrinsic yields. And once we know what those intrinsic needs and yields are, we can do some really cool things with design. And so we're going to go through an example of this. And when you get this right, the work disappears, which sounds oversimplified, but it really isn't. So let's look at this. So a chicken needs shelter, grit, dust, water, air, food, and other chickens. And it produces eggs, meat, feathers, manure, methane, CO2, scratching, foraging, flying, fighting, and there's one missing here, which is entertainment. If you've ever had chickens on your property, you know that they are the most entertaining thing you could possibly ever have. Their intrinsic characteristics are based on their breed, which dictates color, climate tolerance, and breed specific behavior. So if we look at a compost pile now, we can look at the fact that it needs food scraps, carbaceous materials, manure, labor, water, oxygen, heat. It needs microbes, bugs, and space. And it yields soil inoculant, fertility, humus, bugs, heat. It converts waste to resource, and it drought-proof soils. So this is the really interesting thing about permaculture is I go around and I do these consultancies for people. And I'm going to ask you as a question, where do you think most people put their compost pile? I'm just going to wait here. I'm one of those guys that can just wait in the silence till you guys feel really uncomfortable. Well, I won't wait all night, but I'm hoping you guys are going to answer. Far out of the way. Perfect. Great. I knew it would work. So people put their compost far away. Why do they put their compost far away? Yeah. Okay. It looks ugly. It's smelly. Okay. Well, ugly is just a failure in design. Smelly is usually the issue. And so why is it smelly? Well, rotting is true, but in some kind of sense, we're trying to get it to rot. We're getting it to rot in a controlled way. It smells because you suck at composting. And why do you suck at composting? You suck at composting. Well, okay, that's the really nice way of saying it. Absolutely, because you're still learning how to. You suck at composting because it's far away, and because it's far away, it smells. And because it smells, you don't actually have to deal with it because it's far away. So if you put it close to your house and it starts bugging you, you're going to figure it out. You're going to go out there and you're going to start adding stuff until it stops smelling. And so it's this vicious feedback loop. And let me ask another question. Where do you think all the chickens go? Like, where do people place chickens on their property? It's the same answer, far away. And so we show up as a consultant on these properties, small or large, doesn't matter. And people are just like, oh gosh, it's so much work. Why is this so much work? I don't understand. There's not enough time in the day to do everything. And the reason is that when we go onto these properties, we'll end up walking to the compost heap and I measure how many steps it takes for me to get there. And then I walk to the chicken coop and I measure how many steps it takes me to get there. And then I ask them, how often are you going to your compost pile and how often are you going to your chicken coop every day? And then we multiply it out over the year. And it turns out people are literally walking hundreds of kilometers sometimes. And inevitably the client always says, oh, it's good exercise. It's like, yeah, but you don't have enough time in the day to do everything. And because these things are all over the place, you don't have time to go up mountain biking or yoga or whatever. And now I'm here. So the reality is that when we look at the needs and yields of these two elements, and we're going to go to principle number 2 right now. Let me just share my screen again. There's an opportunity to integrate rather than segregate. So if we throw Mother Nature out with the window, she comes back in the door with a pitchfork. And so we have another saying in permaculture that for every hour of doing, we should spend 100 hours of thinking. Okay. And if we do that, we end up making really good decisions. And even if we make mistakes in that, we'll have a better sense of our ability to kind of course correct our situation. So let's go back just quickly to this. So we can see that a compost needs food scraps, carbaceous material, manure, labor, water, oxygen, heat, microbes, bugs, and space. Well, chickens, look at what chickens yield. So they produce feathers, manure. They've got microbes coming out their butt. They've got scratching, so labor, and they want to forage for bugs. And so those are all things that will be our compost pile will benefit from. And then when we look at what their needs are, they need food. So compost piles are going to produce bugs and microbes and things that we can't see, but are very good for chickens. They're also going to produce heat. And so there's a very beneficial, in fact, when if your chicken ever gets sick, one of the best things you can do is feed it composting worms, like red wrigglers, or you can feed it compost, and it will actually re-inoculate its gut. Chickens are a really interesting creature, and if you've ever spent any time with them, I've got a theory about them. Chickens basically have these little water dishes, and that farmers will put out, and we have this kind of belief that clean water is good water, which is mostly true for most animals, including humans. But if you've ever managed chickens, you'll notice that chickens always poop in their water. It doesn't matter how many times a day you clean their water out, they're always pooping in it. And it annoys people who get chickens to no end, because they look at it and be like, oh, how do you drink dirty water? But if you look at the gut of a chicken, it's really simple. It's a beak, it's got a crop and a gizzard and a stomach. It's a very simple digestive tract. And in order to get the food to digest in its gut, it has to eat rocks and dust and dirt, so that the gizzard can basically kind of do this and kind of crush the material before it goes into its stomach and then back out into the back end. It doesn't even have a separate hole for urine and for poop. It all comes out the same hole. And so my theory is that chickens pre-inoculate their water in order to help with the digestion. And there's lots of animals on Earth that actually do this. And so having a compost pile will add to that biodiversity for their gut nutrition. And if you're giving them the right microbes, guess what happens to their eggs and to their meat? It improves. So chickens and compost do really well together. And the other thing with permaculture is that the yield of a system is technically unlimited. What do I mean by that? So I could put all my food scraps into the compost, and they would turn into compost, and then I could put them into my food forest or my garden. Or I can feed them to chickens, and then I can get eggs and meat out of that, and then I still get manure, and I can still get compost. Now I have 2 yields, or 3 yields: eggs, meat, and chickens, and if I can use the feathers, maybe even a 4th yield. Or I can feed the food scraps to red wriggler worms, which are worth an enormous amount, plus they're really good for chickens. So I get worms, I get worm castings, I get chickens, I get eggs, I get manure, and I get compost out of that deal. And so the limit to yield is purely based upon our intellect and our ability to think about how to stack functions into a system. And so to kind of close the story gap on what I said when Malcolm and I were talking about how we potentially use this idea and the way that we operate our businesses, which are basically just communities, is that Malcolm reached out and said, hey, I've got this need. I want to put some content out onto my Facebook channel that is mutually beneficial to my network. And I said, oh, great, I've got this content. I'd love to come up and teach it. And maybe in return, you can come and do something similar for us. And so we're looking for needs and yields where we can co-benefit each other's communities. And so this idea doesn't just have to be in the way that we set up our homes and gardens. It can also be in the way that we operate our businesses, our communities, our families. All of this stuff is about mutualism. And so the sad thing is that a lot of these elements end up getting placed far apart, which means that we're the connector. So we're the one that has to go between the chickens, and we have to mediate that relationship. And then we have to go between the compost pile to mediate that relationship. But I had a student once, and he took me seriously when I said 100 hours of thinking and 1 hour of doing. And he went in to his chicken coop and he said, I'm going to sit here for 100 hours and I'm going to watch these chickens. And I'm pretty sure, I mean, I don't know if he did exactly 100 hours, but he spent a long time there. And he did what we call, what we refer to in permaculture is a form of pattern observation. So he observed the patterns of the chickens. And after all this time watching chickens, he discovered, get this, you're not going to believe it, chickens poop almost 100% of the time after they drink water. Okay. Now, this is a really important piece of information, because one of the biggest pet peeves of people that are raising chickens is how much their coops smell. And so if you know how to, or the signal that sends information to a chicken's gut to make it defecate, then you can control where that defecation occurs. It's incredibly powerful. So let's redesign the chicken coop and the compost heap, knowing that there's a mutually beneficial relationship between the two elements, and design work out of the system. So imagine a chicken coop. We know that heat rises. We know that poop goes downhill. And we know that chickens will happily climb this little set of stairs to get into their area of safety. And if we collect rainwater off of their roof, needs and yields, so the roof produces or collects rainwater, the barrel harvests it. We can put a solar panel up here to run our little pump if we need to, or if we are able to use gravity, that's even better. This then feeds a small little thing called a chicken nipple. And yes, there is something called a chicken nipple, and they emit water. Then the chickens will learn about that chicken nipple, and they will climb up the stairs to the nipple, drink. And if we design the chicken coop right with a trap door down here, then every once in a while we can come into that trap door, open it up, and all the poop falls down onto the compost heap. Now, if we throw all of our food scraps into the compost heap and we leave the compost pile just slightly open so that the chickens are curious enough to get in there, then they will go in and they will eat that compost, which then provides them with food. And as a result, they get their claws in there and they stir it around, which means that I don't have to go and turn that compost heap around. They shred all the mulch apart. And then as a result of that, I get this incredible compost product, and I've had to do almost no work. And every day I go there, I'm just collecting eggs, and every once in a while I might harvest a chicken. And so by understanding gravity, by understanding needs and yields, we've just combined multiple systems into one, and we've eliminated all those kilometers of walking that we tend to do without ever thinking about it, because we just kind of put stuff together and kind of figure it out without spending a little bit of time doing design. And so this is an example of a needs and yields analysis. So what I would recommend you guys do, let me just have a peek here. I'm going to encourage you guys to take a few elements if you want. You don't have to do this, it's up to you. But we can share a little bit of information. And by the way, folks that are on Facebook right now, if you sign up to Malcolm's newsletter at the Light Cellar, and if you want to get onto the Zoom room for the last call, I'm sure Malcolm can put some information into the Facebook channel on that. The folks that are on the Zoom, so we're running something concurrently on the other side, outside of live Facebook. The folks on Zoom are going to be more than welcome to share their designs in the next class if they choose to. So what I'd recommend is you get a piece of paper and you choose one of these 5 elements. So greenhouse, garden, compost pile, rain barrel, and solar panel. Choose 2 of those elements, and it doesn't even have to be those elements. You can just choose 2 elements that you would potentially see in a permaculture property. Do a needs and yields analysis like we just talked about. So understand the needs of that element. So if it's a rain barrel, well, it needs a place to sit, it needs a roof to put water into it, and it needs pipes to convey water. Like, think about all the needs and yields. It yields this big tank, it might yield thermal mass, it yields hydration. And then choose another element, do a needs and yields analysis as well, and then try and figure out how the solar panel and the rain barrel come together. Like, what does the solar panel offer that the rain barrel needs? What does the rain barrel offer that the solar panel needs? And then try and imagine, just like we did with this chicken coop, how those 2 elements might fit together a little bit more effectively than typically they would normally show up in a typical landscape. And if you want, I can go take a look at them in the next session. Okay, so principle number 3 is produce no waste. So when the needs of a system are not met from within, we pay the price in energy and pollution. Okay, and so another interesting thing about this principle is that lately I've been getting a lot of phone calls and emails from people that want to come out of this pandemic with an idea of a new career. So there's a lot of people that are unemployed. And there's a lot of rumblings around the world right now about the Green New Deal and how we can use this crisis as an opportunity and kind of reinvent the world out of it. And so wherever I find waste, there's an opportunity. And so the company that Malcolm and I were talking about just before this call started, Executive Mat Services, they've spun off another company called EcoGrowth. They literally have figured out how to take waste from most commercial businesses and completely eliminate it. And then not only that, but they reduce natural gas consumption, they reduce landfill, and they have a plethora of other products coming out of there. They have these units that sit on the back of grocery stores, and they'll take all the waste, which basically diverts it from the landfill and turns it into something else, usually thermal energy, to heat the grocery store. And they solve multiple problems at the same time. So they reduce the GHG of the building, they reduce the waste products that are coming out of the building, they reduce the landfill, and then they save the company money so they don't have to buy natural gas anymore. Incredible. And so whenever there's a waste product, there's always an opportunity to use that waste in a new, novel way. And in permaculture, what we tend to do, and this kind of ties back into that needs and yields thing, like you don't have a chicken manure problem, you have a deficiency in compost, or you have a deficiency in gardens, or you have a deficiency in something else. We can always take those waste resources and upcycle them into something more productive. So let's see here. How are we doing for time? Got a few more minutes here before we go to questions. There is one more exercise that I'm going to give to you guys tonight. So we'll finish a couple more slides, and we can go through this in the next session if you guys want to take the effort and go through it. And this is the same information that I give at the beginning of our permaculture design course. So I encourage you to do it. You're getting it for free, and you might as well take advantage of the time that you've got right now. So in all properties, in all regeneration activities that we take on, we have something called the order of design priorities. And so when we're looking at a new property, whether it's urban or rural, we want to understand where the water is coming from and where it's going to. Water is absolutely central to life. And so we have this mantra: water, access, and structure. So first you understand water, then you understand access on your property, and then you understand structures. Now, if we look at how conventional subdivisions are created right now, first the developer comes in, they strip all the topsoil, and then they figure out how to maximize the number of houses onto a piece of land. And in order to do that, they have to create artificial drainage systems. And so most of what present day cities are designed around, and even farms too, is around the drainage of water. Now, the only landscape in the world right now, other than these human landscapes, where water leaves as quickly as it comes in is the desert. So if we think about our human landscapes as being patterned after something, if we want to pattern it after a mature ecosystem, then we have to pattern it around the preservation and conservation and even enhancement of water, which is fundamentally different than most of what our cities do. So not only do our cities concentrate and dispose of that water through the way that they're designed, but then what we do is we take pumps and we pump water back up to these properties. And water and sewage represents about 20 to 30% of the energy consumption in any city. So it's immensely expensive to bring all this stuff back to us, when all we have to do is stop it where it lands. And so a lot of the techniques, a lot of this needs and yields and produce no waste and work as a failure in design has to do around how we set up our ecosystems so that when water falls on them, we've got water going into the right locations. And so probably one of the most valuable things that I can tell you in this session tonight, and in any of the sessions, is that every element in your water either needs water or doesn't want it. So if we think about a house, it doesn't really want water in there. If we think about a road or a footpath, it doesn't really want water. If we think about trees or rain tanks or ponds, they want water. And so once we understand water as the master element, then from there, we can figure out where everything goes. So mostly so. There's a few other nuances there that we need to think about. And so when I show up on a property, this is the first thing that I go to understand is how's water moving through that property? And once I understand that, it gets very easy to place the rain tank and the garden and the food forest. And not only where to place those individual elements, but how they relate to each other using that concept of needs and yields. So once we fix the water cycle, by understanding how water, access, and structures play. So first we understand water, then that tells us where access goes, and then that tells us where to place buildings. From a regenerative perspective, we could say blue, green, and brown. So the first thing that we want to do is fix the water cycle. Then we can fix the plant cycle, and then we can fix the carbon cycle. Now, we're all quite worried about climate change and what's happening there. And climate change is, you don't really have a climate change problem. You have a carbon deficiency in your soils. And in order to reverse climate change and deal with the nutrient collapse and deal with water runoff and all the other problems that we talked about, we've got to first go in and fix the water cycle. So a lot of where permaculture's brilliance lies is in these earth care or these sutures, basically, that we put into landscapes. And I say the word suture because once the suture has done its job, we move on. The ultimate rainwater harvesting element on the planet is an old growth forest. That's where we're going. But in order to get there, we have to do a few things in order to give ecology a chance to be able to move in that direction. Dakota Cohen, who has taught for Malcolm several times in the past, every year he has a creek on his property that when he first started doing his permaculture stuff on his property 6 or 7 years ago, was not flowing. And every year it flows a little bit longer now. And he says within a couple of years now, like he's already, it's still flowing today. Like a month after the rains have stopped typically on his property, he still has water leaving his land in an area that typically would be dried up by now. And so he's rapidly fixing his water cycle. He was telling me the other day that every year, because of the water harvesting elements on his property, he harvests 40 years of water every snow melt. So when they look at how much water they use to feed their cows and water their gardens, his water systems are able to capture 40 years, and then those get infiltrated into the ground. And in doing that, he's actually recharging the local aquifers, and people's well water around him is actually going up. It's crazy. So these are all possible in what we're talking about. And again, it doesn't matter if we're talking about small or large. And in fact, we're going to kind of go back down to the micro scale and talk about urban design here. So when we're looking for water harvesting opportunities, one of the first things that we have to do is understand how the water is traversing our property. So where's the water coming from and where is it going to? And I'd like you guys to do these maps as well as a needs and yields analysis for the next session. And then we can figure out, once we know where the water is coming from and where it's going to, we can figure out how to intercept it on the property and put it to productive use in a food forest, in a garden, in any number of systems, in a rain tank. And this is absolutely crucial to understanding how to set out a permaculture property. And again, it doesn't matter if it's on a large property, then we would have lots of arrows all over the place. If it's on a small property, we can kind of go through this. And so we've got a peak to the roof here. And so we know that our roof is a water harvesting collection service. Most of us are going to have eaves troughs, and so there'll be a downspout. So that's a source. If your lawn is sloped in a certain way, you probably have some runoff coming off that lawn. If you have a driveway or sidewalks, those are impervious surfaces that are going to collect water. And the goal with all of this is to go from scarcity, which is what this is typical city design, to abundance. And do I have those pictures in here? I don't. I should bring those up. Next time I will bring those pictures up for you guys. There is, these pictures are from a gentleman named Brad Lancaster I visited a couple years ago. And he literally has transformed the town of Tucson by using very simple techniques that we're going to talk about in the next session. And so I'll just go through a few of these here just to kind of whet your appetite, pardon the pun. And so a road, yeah, once I'm done teaching, my daughter wants me to go on a road trip with her. Anyways, so let's look at this road here. So this road is a water harvesting surface. It's impervious. It's going to collect water. Now, most of the time, we put these concrete gutters in, which sends the water straight to the river. And in doing so, it collects all that crap on the road, like the asbestos from our brake pads, the oil, anything coming off for our cars. And those all end up in the river. And inevitably, when we get into water harvesting, this comment comes up. It's like, well, you're going to harvest that water? Like, doesn't it have all that crap in there? It's like, yeah, I'm totally going to harvest it. And they're like, well, what about all the crap? It's like, well, why is it okay if it goes into the Bow River? And they're like, well, I don't know. I guess Cars Land gets it. So who really cares? But if we all just kind of took responsibility for the waste that we produced, it would slowly start to create these feedback loops. And so I don't think humans are inherently destructive. I think that what we've done in the last couple of 100 years is we've created disconnected feedback loops. We've got disconnection from our own health. We have, like I always say, in Alberta, we've got all this coal power. Like we use coal to generate electricity. That's changing now. But can you imagine if the light switch on the side of my wall over there, there's a little pipe on top of that light switch, and every time I turned it on, that pipe had a direct connection to Wabman Lake where the coal plants are, and a little burst of coal dust came out and like shot me in the mouth so that I had to breathe it into my lungs. I might think twice about turning on that power because there'd be direct feedback every time I used electricity. I had this little pain associated memory, and my behavior around electricity might change. Now that's a negative version of that. The positive version is that when we put solar panels into people's houses and we give them a little dashboard and we say, well, this is how much solar energy you're producing today. This is how much you're consuming. Guess what happens to their consumption? I never have to have a conversation with them about coal dust. I never have to have a conversation about consequences. They just see us like, well, this is what my roof's producing. I don't want to buy anything from the grid. So let's just figure out how to use less. There's never any kind of guilt or negativity around that. When we design rainwater harvesting systems for people that drink their rainwater and use them in their house, they automatically start using less water. And so a lot of the problems that we've created in the world are a result of the fact that we have removed feedback from people. So people cannot make positive decisions that are beneficial to the planet and to themselves because they don't understand the consequences of leaving a tap running or leaving a light on or you know, even eating Twinkies. You know, I mean, I love our public health system, but we know that there's some sort of acute solution, most of the time, to eating crappy food at the end of the day. And so that's what I love about the Light Cellar is that it's all about education. It's about bringing that feedback back into the way that we treat our bodies. And so permaculture is kind of like what the Light Cellar does for our bodies, but for our landscape. And so we look at how to create those feedback mechanisms in the way that we grow some of our food, harvest some of our water, and deal with our wastes. So in this property, we've got all of our rain being collected into rain tanks. The overflow goes into a mulch basin over here, so it'll feed a fruit tree. We've got driveways and sidewalks that are sloped in specific ways so that when water hits them, it gets harvested in another mulch basin. We're harvesting the water, that urban drool, I call it, off of the streets in the city. And here's a really neat thing. There's this thing that scientists have figured out called microbial infallibility. It is probably one of the most positive things I've ever learned about in my life. So microbial infallibility basically says that they've never found a system on Earth where microbes have not been able to figure out how to live. And Brad Lancaster did all these projects in Tucson, and I've got a bunch of these photos, and I've even produced a couple videos on my YouTube channel of his property, and maybe that would be the better thing to show folks. And so they started harvesting all this water, and they built these mulch basins, and they put in mesquite trees, which are native to the area. So they're very adapted to the Tucson region, and the mesquite pods are very nutritious. They took tissue samples of the tree, the leaf, and the mosquito pods to a local university to see if some of those chemicals that were on the road were being picked up by the trees, the leaves, or the mosquito pods. And they did an extensive study. And what's super interesting is they were being picked up, but not by the pods. And so the tree was bioaccumulating the toxins, but it wasn't translating it into the fruit of the tree. And this is what we want to happen. We want these systems to attenuate this nasty stuff. And this comes right back down to that principle that we talked about tonight, which is that waste is just an unused resource. And so these systems are employing microbes and fungi and fauna, and sometimes, flora and sometimes fauna, to hyperaccumulate these issues and turn them into resources. And that is probably one of the most, I mean, they've found microbes living on the rods of spent nuclear fuel. So nature will figure all of this out. Like, I'm actually not concerned about the state of nature. I'm actually concerned about the state of human nature, which is why I teach, is that we actually have to change our belief pattern. We have to change our philosophy, and we have to start working with nature. So I'm just going to show you this image again, and then we're going to move over to questions. And then in the next session, we're going to talk about different ways that you can harvest rainwater and put it to productive use. So I want you to create a map of your property with where water is coming from, where it's going to. And eventually, we're going to figure out how to place the right elements onto the landscape, at least as it pertains to water for this particular course. Because once you get the water piece right, once you understand how to plant the water, planting everything else is easy. If you don't plant the water first, most of the time it's going to fail. And that's been my big insight. And the interesting thing is, I'm an engineer who plants a lot of stuff. It's kind of a weird kind of position to be in, to be a mechanical engineer that plants trees. And I don't really call myself a horticulturist, but the reason that I have success with the trees that I plant is that I understand that water is the element that has to come first. And so I think we'll stop it there tonight. And I'm going to pass host superpowers on to Malcolm. And we can take some questions.
Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, thanks, Rob. So we did have a couple questions. We'll do the ones on Zoom, and then we'll go back to Facebook as well. There's a couple there. So Marcy just wanted a quick refresher. So for our assignment: greenhouse, rain barrel, garden, solar panel, and what was that other element?
I'm going to say roof.
Roof?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. From Peaceful Jeff, what's the value of a chicken tractor over the system that you showed?
So for folks that don't know what a chicken tractor is, let me just get an image up here for you guys so that I can show it.
Oh, and Susan actually replied, design tool versus roof. That's what she picked up on, was that extra element.
Design tool.
Does that sound correct?
Probably not a design tool, no, because I mean, that's not really an element, so to speak. The needs and yields is a design tool. So I want you to use needs and yields and like really it could be any element. It could be a cob oven, an outdoor kitchen, it could be a cafe. It doesn't really matter. I just want you to think about a single element and another single element and understand how they both have needs and yields and where those intersection points lie between the two of them. Actually, I need the host capability back to share my screen. I forgot about that.
Oh yeah, all good.
Okay, there we go. So a chicken tractor is a device that a gentleman named, I think it was Joel Salatin, that created them. And so they're basically, it's probably like 8 by 12 foot long crate that chickens live inside. They typically have wheels on one end, and they get moved every day. And so every day the chickens get access to new grass and all the bugs that are there. And typically they would follow cows by 3 days. So cows would graze the area, and then the chickens would follow 3 days behind the cows in order to get access to the grubs that grow in the manure of the cows. So a chicken tractor can be useful if you've got a really big lawn and you don't mind grazing your lawn with chickens. It's typically would be used in a more kind of rural environment, although I have nefarious ambitions to see chicken tractors in city parks. Every city park could have little chicken tractors. I mean, like you think about the photosynthetic capacity of all the parks in Calgary, there's no reason to be worried about global food shortages. We just have to stop growing the biggest crop on the planet, which is the front lawn, and convert it over to more productive spaces that can actually grow food. So this whole idea can I just have to say this now, because can organic farming feed the world? Absolutely. I had a master's student contact me. I don't know, maybe it was 8 years ago now, and asked me that exact same question. And he said, can organic farms feed the world and organic farming? I said, I think so, but I don't know. Let me just think about it for a bit and get back to you. And so I actually found out, and I've got a blog on this. I'm going to put it up right now for folks that want to and then I can actually tell you the stats directly. Food not lawns. Yeah, okay. The blog is called The Grass Isn't Greener. And so I'll just read these stats off that I uncovered.
Post a link in the chat, I'll pop it up.
Yeah, totally. That's a great idea. This is a very hopeful blog if you read between the lines. So basically it goes to the fact that the lawn was actually this kind of status symbol that was invented in the 1900s. Currently, and this was a few years ago now, North Americans spend close to $30 billion a year maintaining this false civic duty, which is the front lawn. Now, in the United States, I couldn't find the stats for Canada, but they made similar per capita. There's over 40 million acres of land planted to lawn right now. A figure approaching 53 million acres planted last year to wheat. So we're almost growing as much lawn as we are wheat. Since mowing 1 acre is usually 4 liters of fuel, the fuel consumption for cutting grass is astronomical. To mow all the lawn just once uses over 160 million liters of fuel. This is enough to drive a Hummer 884,466,556 kilometers a year, or 22,000 times around the planet. And so it's estimated that 3 million tons of fossil-based fertilizers is used per year in order to keep lawns green, another 30,000 tons of pesticides and herbicides in order to keep it in a monoculture. And so it's estimated that lawns consume between 30 and 60% of the North American water budget in a world where water scarcity threatens our food security. So like if we just reallocated all those resources, and we wouldn't do that because we would do it in a better way, but just pretend that we did, we could grow an incredible amount of food on this land that's currently completely unproductive. And so then I did one more calculation, and I said, so if we converted all of that land over to wheat, which we also wouldn't do because we want mature ecosystems, not immature ones, but just so that we could get a simple calculation of like the lowest level of productive capacity of the lawn. The reality is that, I mean, if we did this, we'd all become celiac, mind you, but let's just play the thought experiment for a second. So we could grow with an average crop on all that lawn, about 76 billion kilograms of wheat, which is enough food in calories. If we convert that wheat over to calories to feed 355 million people a 2,000 calorie diet per day for 1 year. And most of those places where we were growing those lawns, we could actually do 2 crops because it's not all cold like we have up here in Canada. So we could actually feed more than that. So just on the lawns alone, the United States could feed itself easily. And we would save enormous amounts of fossil fuel. So we would reduce climate change. We would increase carbon capacity in the soils. We'd increase nutrient density. We would store way more water. So a 1% increase in soil carbon is equivalent to the storage of 144,000 liters per acre. So like all these problems that we have all stem from the food choices that we make and the lawn choices that we make on a daily basis. And it goes on. And I'll let you kind of go through those numbers and kind of digest them, because I just threw a ton out at you. But this is why I'm not worried about climate change. And I mean, I'm worried about it that humans won't wake up quick enough and change their ways. That's what I'm worried about. I'm not worried about it from a technical, can we reverse this? I'm not worried about nutrient collapse. I know we can grow nutrient dense food. I'm not worried about extinction. I know we can reverse that too. I know we can have our rainforests and our nutrient dense food in unison. Like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. This kind of duality stuff needs to end. We need to figure out that and understand that we are nature expressing itself, but we have to grow up. We have to move beyond our adolescent phase as a species and move into that mature ecosystem ourselves. Okay, sorry about that. That was a bit of a sidebar there, but.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Okay, so one more question that we got on Facebook, and then we'll come back to a few more that are on Zoom here. Is there a way to introduce mycelium into my restorative gardening? Specifically, I have a septic field created with fill, rock, and poor soil, and I want to create a native medicinal garden there. And that's from Shannon on Facebook.
Sorry, can you just say the first part of that question again, Malcolm?
Yeah, absolutely. So is there a way to introduce mycelium into my restorative gardening?
Yes, absolutely. So if you're in Calgary, there's a gentleman named Mike Dorian who runs a company called Living Soil Solutions. And he actually sells, and this would be a really cool thing for you guys to carry in the store maybe. He sells a 20 species spore mix that you can put into your garden. So that's one idea. So if you're transplanting plants, you can actually pre-inoculate these plants with these 20 different species. And 20 species is kind of a drop in the bucket when you think about the thousands and thousands of species that exist out there. The other way to do it, if you want a little bit lower tech way, is are you guys still hosting Blaine and Druzak?
We haven't for a while, but
okay.
Yeah, he's still here in town, and we love everything he does. Work with him closely.
So he used to run these herb walks with Malcolm, and he if you went out to some of the places that he goes and visits on these herb walks, you could bring a small amount of soil back from a healthy forest ecology and introduce that into your soil, and that would have all sorts of inoculant in it. By composting in the way that and there's a whole science to composting, and maybe in a future class we can talk about that, but by creating really good compost, you're actually encouraging mycelium into the soil, excuse me. And then if those are all too much work, the easiest thing that you can do is just by putting mulch on the soil. So if it's a perennial garden, get some really good deciduous, so these are trees that lose their leaves, deciduous mulch. So in Alberta, that would be like poplar and willow. If you're from the East Coast, that would be things like maple or oak. And you just literally mulch the top of your garden. The spores are moving around the planet all the time in the air, and they will drop down onto this mulch. And when the conditions are right, they will sporulate, and mycelium will spread and connect into the system, and you'll be good to go. I will say one more thing. There's a company, Fungi Akuafu, which is west of Edmonton, sorry, west of Calgary and Sundre, and they actually produce spawn, and you can build your own mushroom garden. And so I was talking to Megan Vesey this spring, and if you put cardboard down in your garden and then you inoculate it with their spawn, and then you put fresh poplar chips on there, and every year you put 2 to 3 inches of fresh poplar chips on top of this mycelium bed, you will have an unlimited amount of oyster mushrooms, and you'll never have to inoculate it again. You just have to put those wood chips back onto the bed, and the mycelium will take over it and grow it. So there's lots of different ways that you can do that. There's just a few.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, Peaceful Jeff, thank you for all your comments and questions here. So one of them is, what is the prevalence of LEED and passive house in permaculture housing? You could probably see that in the comments just above you there to get the spelling. LEED, I'm sure you're aware of, but passive without an E and then an HAUS in permaculture housing.
And so, sorry, the question was, what's the connection between the two of them?
What is the prevalence of LEED
Oh,
and
okay.
passive house in permaculture housing?
Yeah, so I mean, in the northern areas here, passive house is really great. I think it's a non-dogmatic, highly energy efficient building style, um, and so the one thing that I'll say about passive house, that I'll say a good thing and a bad thing, because it's non-dogmatic, they let you build with anything. But because it's non-dogmatic, that means that super toxic materials are just as eligible as non-toxic materials. All they're looking for is a specific energy output. So the marriage of passive house with permaculture would probably be closely represented by the Living Building Challenge. So the Living Building Challenge requires you to have net zero water, net zero energy, no building materials in the house that have red list chemicals in them. So these are known carcinogens and known toxins. You've got to produce 20% of your own food. Like it's the hardest building standard there is out there. And so if permaculture and passive house got together and had a baby, that's what they would go and do. And so LEED, on the other hand, is good. It's a good stepping stone, but it tends to be more of a branding thing. So businesses that want to show leadership, so that's kind of why they chose the word LEED. So it's leadership in energy and environmental design or something like that. It's an acronym. It's difficult, but it's not as hard as Living Building Challenge, and certainly not as stringent from an energy perspective as passive house. And so it shows up. I would say LEED doesn't really show up too much in permaculture. Passive house does.
Cool. Okay, Peaceful Jeff says, you aren't worried about runaway permafrost melting.
So I live my life based upon a philosophy of sphere of influence versus sphere of concern. And I think it's been really important for me. I have very little ability to influence runaway permafrost. It sounds defeatist, maybe, but I have an enormous amount of influence over how I teach my courses, and the students that I help, and the consultancy that I do. And moving outside of my sphere of influence would end up, and if I spent too much time there, I'd probably end up in a really deep state of depression. And then I'd be completely useless. And so at some point, we have to come to peace with what and where we have influence. And none of us get out of this alive. We know that. That's a guarantee. And so with the hours that I've been given on this planet, I choose to work towards influencing the things that I feel like I have agency over. That's the best answer I can give to that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for that. And maybe we'll just wrap it up with one last quick question. This one came out of Facebook. What are the 3 factors that you look for when choosing a property?
Well, I can say most people buy the wrong piece of land, not because the land is wrong, but because they haven't got clear on their goals. So the first factor has nothing to do with the land at all, and that is all about goal setting. And we have a whole process that we help people with to get clear on their goals. In fact, we get you so clear on your goals that you can distill it down on one page, and it should have nothing on it. And just so you can see that I live by what I teach. I don't know if you can see that, if it's getting washed out. That's my 1-page goal statement. I live my life by that. And so number 1 is your goals. And then once you know what your goals are, then the elements that you need on your property in order to fulfill those goals becomes fairly clear. So it's only one thing, actually. Like the only thing that matters is your goals. And so we say that when we consult with people, if they want us to ask them to work on their property, you either if they've bought the wrong piece of land, or you either change your goals or you change your property. But if your goals aren't willing to change, then you need to live somewhere else if you want to achieve those goals on that piece of land. So there's only one thing. It's getting clear on what you want in your life.
Yeah. And that was going to be my question, actually, was because I know you did move out of town. You had created, probably what we would all dream about in an urban environment, like a literal paradise. You shared a little bit about it last week in part 1. And now here you are out of town. Obviously, that relates to your goals. Anything you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So what's interesting, it took us 10 years to find this property. And so not only do we help people get clear on their goals, but once you have a really clear goal statement, and we call it actually your values and your vision. So we want to know what your values are. Those are fundamental. Like, what do you value deeply in life? And what is your vision of the future? So what do you want your future to look like? And we write it in a way that sounds like it's already true. So we write them in statements as though those things are true today. And this would be a really great workshop, actually, for and the guy to teach it would be Dakota. He's absolutely, as you know, he's kind of beyond, he's like a wise elder stuck in a 28-year-old body. But anyways, he so when we get clear on our vision and our values, then we have a decision-making process. And so the reason that it took us so long to find this piece of property was that so one of our statements is that I live in a clean, thriving ecosystem, one that supports diversity, resilience, productive gardens, good food, healthy humans, and health for the rest of the beings and creatures that live within it. And then another one is, so I have a beautiful, loving, supportive, and challenging life partner, and I'm part of a community based on loving, relationships, strong communication, mutual challenges, sharing vision, general resilience, and a sense of fun, playfulness, and justice. And where's the other one? I am debt-free with 2 years worth of salary and savings. So there were a bunch of, and there's more statements than that, but there were a bunch of statements that we had. And every time we looked at a property, we would basically compare options. And so we would say, well, is this new property going to raise us up higher in terms of our vision statement, or is it going to be neutral, or is it going to be negative? And so every time we looked at a property, we'd compare it. And we've literally got 11 testing questions that we use. Not every question gets used in every decision, but those questions help us to reflect on our vision statement. And every time we found one, it ended up being that we were better off staying in the city. It was just like, that was a better operation for us. That was a better place for us to raise our kids and live, until we found this place. And then it was like, nope. Now we finally found the thing that will raise our quality of life, our standard of living. And we actually call them quality of life statements. So it's like the ultimate goal with all of this is to improve quality of life. That's the ultimate goal of permaculture. And we do that because we recognize that nature does a whole bunch of work for us, and she does it better than we'll ever do. She makes food more healthy than we can make, and she does a lot of the work that we don't want to do. And she can actually enhance our lives if we just let her into our life. And so, we found the property that was perfect for us, maybe nobody else. But we were clear on our vision first.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Well, I want to thank everyone for being on the call tonight, especially yourself, Rob, sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and just inspiration absolutely. These calls have been super inspiring for me, and I know everyone else. We've all just been glued to the screen here, and yeah, appreciate that. So we will be meeting back here next Wednesday, same time, 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and yeah, really appreciate it again, and looking forward to next week. Thanks again, everyone, for being part of today. Please share this out. This is life transformation information that we really, truly, honestly want to get to everyone. So that's why I'm doing the Facebook as well. And if anyone's that's watching that hasn't signed up, then this is the way that I will send you all 3 parts. Plus, Rob has given me the slides. So once next week is over, we'll have those slides for you guys to going out in the email, so you can keep that as reference. And yeah, I'm looking forward to next week again. Any final words from you, Rob?
No, guys, just thanks so much for showing up and sticking with it. And I look forward to seeing if you guys do the homework. I'd love to take a peek at that right before the class starts, and so we